Hello, and welcome to episode 164 of Dark and Stormy Book Club. In honor of Cinco de Mayo, we are going to have
a Hispanic Author Roundup.
Yes. I'm Ann Dark.
I'm Tracy Stormy.
And I'm Kathy Knight.
And together we are
It Was a Dark and Stormy Book Club,
a podcast for mystery lovers.
Welcome.
If you enjoy our show, please consider contributing to the Dark and Stormy Patreon. By becoming a patron, you will help us create better and quality content. There are also benefits to becoming a patron, such as exclusive content and Dark and Stormy merchandise. Become a supporter at patreon.com/darkandstormybc. Check our website for the link. We appreciate any and all contributions. Thank you.
My first book is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia, and it's put out by Del Rey Publishing. First of all, this is not a mystery. It goes into more of the suspense or horror category. It's set in Mexico in the early 1950s. It features a young woman named Noemi. Noemi is asked by her father to travel to a small, remote mountainside estate where her cousin Catalina is living. Catalina has written to her father, made all kinds of accusations that she was being poisoned and people were trying to get her. But she always had a history as a child of being rather dramatic. He asked Noemi to travel to this small, remote area to check on Catalina. Well, when she arrives, it's this run-down, mountainous estate. It's covered in fog all the time. It is the home of the Doyle family. And the Doyle family consists of Howard, who is the patriarch of the family. He's an ancient man who is basically bedridden. And then his son, Virgil, who is Catalina's husband, and the housekeeper, whose name is Florence, and she is a niece of Howard's, and her son, Francis. Francis is the only friend that Noemi finds in this area. They tell her she has tuberculosis and she must rest. So anytime Noemi wants to see her, she's in bed and they've got her drugged with something and she's sleeping. Well, she insists on talking to Catalina, and Catalina tells her, please go see this healer in the small town. Get me some medicine. Florence, the housekeeper, tells her, you must let me know whenever you want to do anything. You cannot leave the house. You have to have an escort. And Noemi isn't used to this. She's a kid who goes off on her own. She takes the car and goes into town. Florence about has a fit. This whole story is about a haunting, a family's control over people's lives. It's very eerie. It's very well done. I wouldn't say it's one that's real plausible.
Well, most ghost stories, there's an element that you have to suspend belief.
And you would have to do that. It was very well done. I enjoyed reading this book. Noemi is a very good character. She's very strong-willed, and she's used to having her own way. And she's not going to let these people tell her what to do and what not to do. Catalina's kind of wish-washy. She's just kind of drugged up all the time. She comes through in the end. I liked the conclusion of the book.
Was it spooky?
In a way. It wasn't the most suspenseful book I've ever read.
But it was a good story.
But it was a very good story.
Was this book originally written in Spanish and then translated to English?
I'm not sure about this one. Mexican by birth, Canadian by inclination, Silvia Moreno-Garcia's novel won a Copper Cylinder Award, her first novel. Mexican Gothic has won a Pacific Northwest Book Award and made many Best of the Year lists. She has an MA in Science and Technology Studies from the University of British Columbia. She's a columnist for the Washington Post, and she co-edits the horror magazine The Dark with Sean Wallace. She lives in Vancouver, British Columbia, and her website is sylviamoreno-garcia.com. I like this book. I would recommend it for somebody who likes mild horror.
Oh, okay. And there are quite a few
people who don't like graphic. This is not graphic in any way.
Or for us, the spookier the better.
Yeah, right. So it was kind of mild from my perspective. I would read more of her books.
Well, mine is The Secret in Their Eyes by Eduardo Sacheri. It was written in 2005, and it was put out by Blackstone Publishing. Benjamin Chaparro is a man haunted by his past. A retired detective, he remains obsessed with a decades-old case of a rape and murder of a young woman in her own bedroom. As he revisits the details of the investigation, he is reacquainted with his long, unrequited love for Irene Ornos, just then an intern, now a respected judge. Well, this book opens up with our protagonist, Benjamin Chaparro, attending his retirement party from the police force as a detective. He borrows a typewriter after the party and sets to work writing a book about the case that haunts his dreams. The book switches between the present and the past, where in the past, he's talking about the actual crime and what happened surrounding it, where in the present, he's talking about the writing process and also catching up with some of the people that were from the past.
Now, is he Mexican?
He's from Buenos Aires, Argentina. With the switching off between the present and the past, I will say there were a few times that I got a little confused of which time frame I was in, but after a little digging, I was right back on track. I will also say that I enjoyed the part of the book that took place in the past just a little bit more because I really like the 1970s Argentina vibe. Eduardo did a great job taking me there. The case involved the rape and murder of Liliana. She was the wife of a bank clerk who was beyond devastated when she was murdered. He truly lived and breathed for his wife. Chaparro found himself jealous of the husband for getting to experience such deep love because he himself was actually in a loveless marriage and had a deep secret crush on an intern that worked for the police. He kept that quite secret, but his heart ached for her. I loved all the characters in the book. After the crime was committed, a gentleman named Gomez was convicted of the crime and served time and then was released early. This is where the story really gets interesting because Morales, the bank teller, turns to Chaparro and contemplates revenge. Of course, Chaparro understands, but he's a police officer, so he has to be very careful what he says. But that's where I'm going to leave the story. But I will tell you the ending was the most satisfying ending I have read in years. It brought out so many different emotions. Eduardo did such an amazing job. But I'm probably not telling you a story that you've never heard before because this was made into an Oscar-winning movie. It won for Best Foreign Language Film in the year 2009. I watched this, and believe me, I'm a gal who always says that the book is better than the movie. Well, in this one, I would say they're right on par for being about the same. It was then remade in 2015, and it starred Nicole Kidman. That one was good, but I liked the Spanish version just a little bit better. So not only have I recommended a book to you, if you've never seen the movie, I would say, yeah, if you haven't read the book, go check out the book. And if you haven't seen the movie, go check out the movie. Do both. You will not be disappointed.
Eduardo Sacheri was born in Buenos Aires in 1967. His first collection of short stories, Waiting for Tito and Other Football Stories, was published in Spain in 2000 under the title The Traders and Other Stories. 3 of his collections were published between 2001 and 2007, all of which have been bestsellers in Argentina. His novel, The Secret in Their Eyes, won the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film in 2010.
My second book is called The North Face of the Heart by Dolores Redondo. This is about a young policewoman, Amaya Salazar. She is from Spain, and it's the search for a serial killer who targets whole families in the wake of a natural disaster. She is sent to the FBI Academy in Virginia for classes on profiling. Now, she was raised by an aunt in Spain in a small town. Her mother spent her entire childhood trying to kill her. Her father just couldn't see it, so an aunt took her in and raised her. It goes into great detail of what they did to her as a child. She has become a FBI trainee in Virginia, and there seems to be a series of murders happening around the country. There was one in New Jersey, one in Oklahoma, one in Texas, where an entire family is killed. The family dynamic is always the same. A father, mother, 4 children, and an older grandparent. They are all killed during a natural disaster, like a tornado, hurricane, any kind of calamity like that. The bodies are all found, laid out in a straight line. Their heads are turned. They're facing off into the west. The FBI is trying to find out what and who is doing these murders. Well, at the murder scene in Oklahoma, there was a witness. A tornado was coming. The family had gone into the shelter, and this little boy who was a neighbor, he was coming over to play with his friend, who was one of the family members, and he climbed into a chicken coop. When the storm came, he couldn't get any further, and he had to do something. So he went into the chicken coop, and he actually saw a man come in with a briefcase. He was an official-looking man. He had a badge. The murderer always tried to cover the wounds that he made while he shot these victims. He put, like, pieces of wood from a tornado into the bullet wound so that the FBI wouldn't realize that they were shot. A lot of these cases were just shuffled aside, saying, oh, they were killed in the tornado. The fact they were all lined up in a row and all set out the same was beside the point. Well, Amaya has a history of feelings. It's not like ESP. When she goes to a scene, she can picture what happened to these victims. They're trying to get to the next victims before the murderer can. They go to New Orleans because there's a hurricane coming, Hurricane Katrina. She said, if this murderer is going to do the same thing he did to the others, he's going to go where Hurricane Katrina is. And she's right. I won't go into too much detail on how the murder was solved. It is very, very well done. I was very surprised when I read about who did it. The story is laid out where Amaya's story is put in every chapter or so. There's a little blurb on what happened in her childhood. This poor kid. It was an excellent book. I highly recommend it. You won't be sorry you read this one. And the author does a great job of putting the reader in the midst of the hunt for this killer. You want to find out who did it before the next natural disaster.
Sounds really good.
It is excellent. The backstory of her childhood is very well done, too. Dolores Redondo is a Spanish author. She does not speak English. She studied law and culinary arts and worked in business for a few years before she started writing. She has more than 1 million copies of her books in Spain. Most of her books have been translated into more than 30